The evening air felt crisp as Elena Mercer pulled her worn coat tighter around her shoulders. She stood outside the grand Fairmont concert hall, watching well-dressed people stream through the ornate entrance doors. Their laughter floated toward her like music from another world, a world she cleaned but never truly belonged to. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, clutching the ticket she'd saved 3 months to buy. At 42, Elena wasn't used to giving herself pep talks. Most days she quietly moved through life, pushing her cleaning cart through the hallways of the Pine Ridge Music School, invisible to the students rushing past her. Tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't coming to clean. She was coming to listen. The famous Maestro Orlov, the Russian piano genius who had played in every major concert hall in the world, was giving a rare masterclass. When Elena had seen the poster in the school hallway, something inside her chest had tightened. She'd watched videos of him playing late at night on her small tablet, his hands moving like they belonged to a different species of human. His Chopin made her cry. His Rachmaninoff made her hold her breath. And now here she was. Elena joined the line, feeling out of place among silk scarves and expensive perfume. The woman ahead of her wore diamonds that caught the light from the chandeliers overhead. Elena's gaze dropped to her own hands, clean but rough from years of work, nails cut short and practical. These hands had scrubbed countless toilets and mopped miles of floors. They had also, when no one was watching, danced across piano keys with a grace that surprised even her. "Ticket, please," the usher said, barely glancing at her. Elena handed over her precious ticket, the paper slightly wrinkled from being held too tightly. The concert hall opened before her like a dream. Red velvet seats stretched in perfect rows, the ceiling arched high overhead with gold details catching the light. The centerpiece was the grand piano on stage, massive, black, and gleaming under the spotlight. Elena had never been this close to such a magnificent instrument. The pianos she played were the worn practice room models, always slightly out of tune with sticky keys that sometimes needed coaxing. She found her seat in the very back row. From here the stage seemed far away, but that was okay. She hadn't come to be seen. "Is anyone sitting here?" A man with salt and pepper hair pointed to the seat beside her. "No, go ahead," Elena said, shifting her coat to make room. "Thomas," he offered with a friendly nod. "Elena," she replied quietly. "First time at one of Orlov's masterclasses?" Thomas asked, settling in. Elena nodded. "I've wanted to see him play for years. He's brilliant but brutal," Thomas said with a chuckle. "Reduced a Juilliard graduate to tears last year. But if you can handle his criticism, there's no better teacher." Elena didn't mention that she wasn't a student, at least not officially. How could she explain that she taught herself to play on stolen moments after everyone had left the building? That she memorized sheet music left behind by forgetful students? That the night janitor, Mr. Bell, sometimes let her stay an extra hour if she helped him with the recycling first? The lights dimmed and the audience quieted. A thin man with impressive white hair strode onto the stage, his posture rigid and commanding despite his 70-plus years. Maestro Victor Orlov didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply sat at the piano and began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall. Elena closed her eyes. His playing was everything she'd imagined and more, technically flawless but also alive with feeling. Each note seemed to have its own story, its own reason for existing exactly when and how it did. When he finished the passage, the audience erupted in applause. Orlov acknowledged them with a small nod before speaking, his Russian accent thick but his English precise. "That is how it should sound," he said. "Now we will see how far from this mark our students fall today." A nervous laugh rippled through the audience. Elena watched as Orlov motioned to the wings and a young man in a crisp suit walked onto the stage. "This is Peter Chen from the Boston Conservatory," the maestro introduced him. "He will attempt the same passage." Elena felt sorry for Peter, whose hands visibly trembled as he took his place at the piano. His playing was impressive, far better than Elena could do. But compared to the maestro, it sounded mechanical, like he was so focused on getting the notes right that he forgot why they mattered. Orlov stopped him halfway through. No, you play like a computer. Where is the heart? Where is the story?" Again. Peter tried again, and again Orlov stopped him. "Your left hand is too heavy. It drowns the melody like a stone tied to a drowning man." The critique continued for 15 uncomfortable minutes before the next student was called. By the time the third student finished, Elena's admiration for the maestro's playing was matched only by her fear of his sharp tongue. During a brief intermission, Thomas turned to her. "Brutal as promised. Would you ever want to play for him?" Elena laughed softly. "No, I'm not." She paused, not sure how to define what she was. Not a student. Not a professional. Just a woman who found her peace in music during quiet nights when no one was listening. "I'm just here to learn." Thomas nodded, seeming to sense her discomfort with the question. "Well, sometimes watching others make mistakes is the best education. You don't have to bleed yourself." When the program resumed, a young woman played Chopin with technical precision but little emotion. Orlov's critique was cutting. "You play like you are reading a shopping list, not poetry." Elena watched each student carefully, not just their playing, but how they sat, how they approached the piano, how they placed their hands. She'd learned this way for years, observing, absorbing, trying later in the empty practice rooms. Sometimes she'd spend weeks working on a single movement that she'd seen a student struggle with, figuring out the fingering by trial and error. By the time the fifth student finished, the audience was growing restless. The constant criticism, however educational, had become exhausting. Orlov seemed to sense this and announced they would take a different approach. "Now I will demonstrate Debussy's Clair de Lune, and then our final student will attempt it." Elena sat up straighter. This was her favorite piece, one she'd practiced countless times in the dark school, with only the moon through the windows for company. Orlov's rendition was breathtaking. The familiar melody flowed like water, each note hanging in the air for precisely the right amount of time before dissolving into the next. Elena could almost see the moonlight rippling on a lake, feel the gentle night breeze. When he finished, the silence before the applause was its own kind of tribute. "Our final student tonight is Sophie Reynolds from the New York Academy," Orlov announced. "She will now play the same piece." But instead of Sophie, a flustered event coordinator rushed onto the stage and whispered something to the maestro. His bushy eyebrows drew together in annoyance. "It seems," he announced to the audience, "that Ms. Reynolds has fallen ill and cannot perform." "This is most inconvenient," murmurs spread through the hall. The coordinator whispered something else, and Orlov nodded reluctantly. "The coordinator suggests we might have a volunteer from the audience," he said, his tone making it clear he thought little of the idea. "Is there anyone here who has prepared Clair de Lune and wishes to attempt it?" The hall fell silent. Elena's heart began to race. She knew this piece by heart. Every note, every pause, every subtle shift in dynamics. She had played it during the darkest times of her life, finding comfort in its beauty. But play it here? In front of all these people? In front of him? Anyone? Orlov looked around the silent hall, his expression growing more impatient. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she raised it, just high enough to be seen. What was she doing? She couldn't possibly, but the coordinator had spotted her. "We have someone. Back row, ma'am, would you come down?" All faces turned toward Elena. Thomas looked at her with surprise and whispered, "Good luck." Each step down the aisle felt like walking through deep water. Elena was acutely aware of her simple dress, her practical shoes, her lack of jewelry or makeup. She didn't look like someone who belonged on that stage. The whispers followed her. Who is she? Is she even a student? This should be interesting. As she reached the stage steps, she saw Orlov studying her with skeptical eyes. The magnificent piano waited, gleaming under the lights, far grander than anything she had ever played. For a moment, Elena considered turning back. But then she thought of all the nights she had spent with music as her only friend, how it had carried her through grief and loneliness, how it spoke when words failed. This wasn't about impressing anyone. This was about honoring the music that had saved her so many times. She climbed the steps, her legs somehow supporting her despite their trembling. The coordinator looked uncertain but gestured toward the piano. Orlov stepped aside, his expression making it clear he expected little. Elena sat down at the bench, adjusting it slightly. The keys before her were perfect, unmarred by years of student practice. She placed her hands in her lap, took a deep breath, and for just a moment imagined she was back in the empty school at night, with only the moon watching. Then she lifted her hands to the keys. Elena's fingers hovered above the keys for what felt like an eternity. The spotlight was warm on her skin, so different from the cold, empty practice rooms where she usually played. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her, judging her before she'd played a single note. In the front row, a woman in an expensive silk blouse whispered to her companion. The sound carried just far enough for Elena to catch fragments. "Cleaning staff? And, is this a joke?" Elena's throat tightened. Maybe this had been a mistake. She didn't belong here on this stage at this magnificent piano worth more than she earned in years. Then she remembered why she had come. Not for these people, not for their approval, for the music itself, which had been her faithful companion when everything else had fallen away. She closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes of Clair de Lune floated up from the piano like ripples in still water. Elena forgot about the audience, forgot about the maestro watching with his arms crossed. She was back in the empty school hallway. Moonlight streaming through tall windows, the night watchman's footsteps fading as he made his rounds. Her fingers found each key without hesitation. This piece lived in her muscle memory, in the very marrow of her bones. She had played it during the darkest night of her life after burying her mother 3 years ago. She had played it the day she'd been promoted from part-time to head janitor, a small victory that had meant she could finally afford health insurance. She had played it last week, working through a tricky passage until her fingers ached and the school security guard had gently reminded her it was past midnight. As she moved into the middle section, where the piece builds like a wave gathering strength, Elena leaned slightly forward as if physically entering the music. This was the part that had always felt like a conversation to her. The right hand asking a question, the left hand answering back and forth until they joined in harmonious agreement. In the audience, Thomas, who had sat beside her earlier, was watching with his mouth slightly open. Next to him, a stern-faced music professor who had been checking his watch impatiently throughout the master class, now sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Elena's hands. On stage, Maestro Orloff had uncrossed his arms. The perpetual frown that seemed etched into his face had softened into something like puzzlement. He tilted his head slightly as if hearing something unexpected. None of this registered to Elena. She was entirely within the music now, shaping each phrase with the care of someone handling something precious and fragile. When she reached the climax of the piece where the melody rises like a tide before gently receding, tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness or joy, but from the simple, overwhelming beauty of the moment, of being exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was born to do. As the final notes faded, Elena kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, unwilling to break the spell. The concert hall was utterly silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the rustle of a program. Then she opened her eyes and reality came rushing back. The spotlight, the stage, the hundreds of people staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. And they were. Until this moment, she had been invisible to them. Just another forgettable face in worn clothes, easily overlooked, easily forgotten. Now they couldn't look away. The silence stretched on for another heartbeat. Then, too, Elena felt her cheeks flush. Had she played that badly? Had she embarrassed herself in front of all these people who actually knew what good music sounded like? Then from somewhere in the middle of the audience, someone began to clap. Others joined in, and suddenly the entire hall erupted in applause. It wasn't polite, reserved applause. It was the kind that comes from genuine surprise and appreciation, growing louder as people rose to their feet. Elena blinked, disoriented by the response. She looked toward Maestro Orloff, expecting to see disapproval, or at least the same critical expression he'd worn all evening. Instead, he was studying her with intense curiosity, as if trying to solve a puzzle. He stepped forward and the audience quieted immediately. "Your name?" he asked, his accent thicker than before. "Elena." "Elena Mercer," she replied, her voice barely audible even to herself. "And where do you study, Elena Mercer?" His tone wasn't unkind, but it carried the weight of authority. The question hung in the air. Elena swallowed hard. I'm not a student." A murmur rippled through the audience. "You have a teacher then? Who trained you?" Orloff pressed. Elena shook her head. "No teacher. I work at Pine Ridge Music School. I clean the building." The murmur grew louder. Orloff's bushy eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "You expect me to believe you learned to play Debussy like this? With no training? No teacher?" Elena's hands twisted in her lap. I listen. I watch the students practice. And at night when everyone's gone, sometimes I practice too. She didn't add that she'd also watched countless videos online, or that she'd borrowed music theory books from the school library and studied them during her lunch breaks, or that she'd been playing on whatever pianos she could find since she was 8 years old, when a kind neighbor had let her use the out-of-tune upright in their basement. Orlov turned to the audience. Did you hear this? She is the cleaning woman. She has no teacher. He threw his hands up dramatically, as if appealing to the heavens for an explanation. Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment. She wished she could disappear, melt into the stage floor, become invisible again. But Orlov wasn't finished. He turned back to her, his intense gaze fixing her in place. Play something else. I'm sorry. Elena wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Play something else, he repeated more forcefully. Something different, something... He waved his hand as if searching for the right word. Something with more fire. Elena hesitated. She knew many pieces by heart, but under his scrutiny her mind went blank. Chopin, Orlov suggested impatiently. Can you play Chopin? Elena nodded slowly. The Nocturne in E-flat major? Orlov gestured toward the piano. Then play. Elena turned back to the keys, trying to calm her racing heart. This piece was different from Clair de Lune, less dreamy, more structured, with a haunting melody that had always reminded her of someone telling a story about long-ago love. She began to play, and once again the music carried her away. The familiar melody flowed from her fingers, each note connecting to the next like words in a sentence. In this piece she had always imagined herself as a storyteller, sharing some ancient tale that needed to be remembered. From the corner of her eye, she saw Orlov circle the piano, watching her hands with the focus of a scientist observing an experiment. When she reached a particularly difficult passage, where the right hand plays a delicate filigree of notes above the steady left hand, he leaned in closer. Elena didn't falter. Her hands knew what to do even as her mind registered his scrutiny. Years of practicing in stolen moments had taught her to play through distraction, through fatigue, through doubt. When she finished, the applause was immediate. This time Elena managed a small smile, still not quite believing what was happening. Orlov raised his hand and the audience fell silent again. He stood beside the piano looking out at the crowd before returning his attention to Elena. In 50 years of teaching, he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, I have seen many students, some with great natural talent, some who have worked very hard, some who play with perfect technique but no soul, some with much soul but clumsy fingers. He paused, looking directly at Elena. Rarely do I find someone who plays with both the heart and the hands in perfect agreement. A wave of whispers moved through the audience. On stage, Elena sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Tell me, Orlov continued, these pieces you play, did you learn them by ear? By watching? How does a cleaning woman with no teacher play this way? His question wasn't unkind, but it carried a genuine bewilderment that made Elena realize how strange her story must seem to someone like him, who had probably spent his entire life in conservatories and concert halls. Some by ear, she said quietly. Some from sheet music left in the practice rooms. I can read music I taught myself from books, and I watch the students. I listen to how the teachers correct them. Orlov shook his head in amazement. All these years of formal training, expensive schools, famous teachers, and here you are, teaching yourself in the dark. He turned to address the audience again. Tonight we plan to see students who have had every advantage demonstrate their skills. Instead, we find ourselves witnessing something far more rare. Elena wasn't sure if she should feel proud or mortified. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not like this. One more test, Orlov said suddenly. He turned to Elena with a challenging gleam in his eye. Do you compose? Elena hesitated. The pieces she created herself weren't like Debussy or Chopin. They were simple personal things she played when she couldn't find the words for what she was feeling. Sometimes, she admitted, just little things. Nothing like real composers. Play one, Orlov commanded. Something of your own creation. This request was more terrifying than the others. Playing the masters was one thing. Their genius could shine through even her imperfect rendition. But playing her own music? That would be like opening her diary for everyone to read. Yet something in Orlov's expression told her this was important. He wasn't mocking her. He was genuinely curious. Elena took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys once more. After a moment's hesitation, she began to play a melody she had composed on a winter evening 2 years ago, when the school was empty and snow fell silently outside the windows. She had never given it a title, but in her mind, she called it The Long Walk Home. The melody that flowed from Elena's fingers was simpler than Debussy or Chopin. But it carried something the masterworks didn't, her own story told in the language of music. The piece began softly, like footsteps in snow, each note placed carefully as if testing thin ice. Elena had composed this on a night when the heating in her apartment building had failed. After her shift at the school, she'd stayed late, seeking warmth as much as music. The piece reflected that evening, the chill that had seeped into her bones, the worry about paying the electric bill, but also the strange peace she'd found in the empty building, with moonlight casting long shadows across the practice room floor. As she played, the melody grew more complex. Her left hand created a steady rhythm like a heartbeat, while her right hand wove a delicate pattern above it. There was loneliness in the music, but not despair. Even in the minor passages, a thread of hope ran through the notes, building toward something warmer. Orlov stood completely still, his usual restlessness gone. His eyes never left Elena's hands as they moved across the keys with a grace that belied their years of scrubbing floors and carrying heavy garbage bags. When she reached the middle section of her composition, Elena allowed herself to play with more emotion than she usually permitted. This part had always reminded her of her mother, the soft strength that had guided Elena through childhood, the quiet dignity with which she had faced hardship. The melody here was like a conversation between two voices, sometimes in harmony, sometimes answering each other across octaves. In the audience, a woman in the fourth row wiped away a tear. Beside her, a stern-looking man who had been checking his emails during earlier performances now stared at the stage, his phone forgotten in his lap. At the back of the hall, Thomas, who had sat next to Elena earlier, watched with an expression of wonder, as if witnessing something he hadn't believed possible. Elena was unaware of all this. She had fallen into that rare state where the musician and the music become one thing, where conscious thought steps aside and something deeper takes over. Her fingers found keys she hadn't planned to play, adding small flourishes and subtle changes that made the piece richer than it had ever been when she'd played it alone. As she approached the final section, the melody transformed. What had begun as a solitary walk through winter darkness opened up into something that felt like sunrise. The harmonies brightened, the tempo lifted slightly, and Elena's hands moved with increasing confidence toward the resolution. The last notes hung in the air like a question finally answered, neither sad nor joyful, but somehow both at once. The sound of someone who had walked a long road and found, if not home, then at least a moment of belonging. When Elena finished, she didn't immediately lift her hands from the keys. The silence in the hall was complete, as if everyone was holding their breath together. Then Maestro Orlov did something no one had seen him do all evening. He smiled. It wasn't a broad smile, just a slight lifting of the corners of his mouth. But on his usually stern face, it was like watching ice crack in spring. He turned to the audience, his expression now visible to all. "This," he said, gesturing toward Elena, "is why we make music." The audience erupted in applause more thunderous than before. People rose to their feet, some calling "Bravo!" in the tradition of classical concerts. A woman in the second row brought her fingers to her lips and gave a piercing whistle of approval, earning disapproving looks from her neighbors but not caring one bit. Elena finally looked up, her cheeks flushed with exertion and emotion. The standing ovation overwhelmed her. She had never imagined such a response, not in her wildest dreams during those lonely nights of practice. Orlov raised his hand, and gradually the audience quieted, though many remained standing. "What is the name of this piece?" he asked Elena. She shook her head slightly. "It doesn't have one. Not really. But you must call it something in your mind," Orlov pressed. Elena hesitated. "I think of it as The Long Walk Home," she admitted softly. Orlov nodded as if this made perfect sense. "And how long have you been composing?" "I don't know if what I do is really composing," Elena said. "I just play what I feel sometimes." "That," Orlov said firmly, is exactly what composing is. Anyone can learn notes on a page. Few can translate life into sound. He turned to the audience again. We have witnessed something remarkable tonight. A talent that has grown not in the hothouse of conservatories but in the wild, finding its own way toward the light. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. In the front row, one of the official students who had played earlier was nodding thoughtfully, any jealousy overshadowed by genuine appreciation of what they just heard. Tell me, Orlov said, turning back to Elena, why are you cleaning floors instead of playing pianos? The question hung in the air, both simple and impossibly complex. Elena's fingers fidgeted slightly in her lap. Life took different turns, she said finally. My mother got sick when I was 17. College wasn't an option anymore. And then one thing led to another, and she gestured vaguely, encompassing the years of work, struggle, and putting dreams aside. Orlov's eyes softened with unexpected understanding. Life has many movements, he said, like a symphony. Sometimes we play the main theme. Sometimes we are just part of the accompaniment. But always we are in the music. He spoke with the wisdom of his 70 years. And for a moment, Elena saw past his intimidating reputation to the human beneath, someone who had known his own struggles, his own detours on the road. But now, he continued, we must discuss what happens next. Next? Elena echoed. You cannot go back to only playing in empty rooms at night, Orlov said firmly. It would be like locking a nightingale in a broom closet, criminal. A small laugh escaped Elena. The image was so absurd, yet somehow perfectly captured how she'd felt all these years. A singer confined to spaces where no one could hear. Orlov turned to address someone off stage, speaking rapidly in what Elena guessed was Russian. A moment later, the event coordinator hurried out, looking both flustered and excited. They conversed in low tones while the audience waited, the buzz of conversation growing as people discussed what they'd just witnessed. Thomas caught Elena's eye from his seat and gave her a thumbs up. Nearby, a group of conservatory students were huddled together, glancing at her with expressions ranging from admiration to disbelief. The woman who had whispered about the cleaning staff now looked thoroughly embarrassed, studying her program with sudden intensity. After what seemed like an eternity, Orlov turned back to Elena. I have made a decision, he announced, his tone suggesting that arguing would be futile. Next month I'm giving a special concert at Riverside Hall. You will play there. Elena's mouth fell open. What? No, I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, Orlov cut her off. You will play your Debussy, your Chopin, and most importantly, your own compositions. But I don't have enough pieces for a concert, Elena protested weakly. Then you will write more, Orlov said simply. I think you have many songs inside you waiting to be born. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. Playing here tonight had been terrifying enough. The thought of a formal concert with tickets and programs and expectations. Maestro, she began, I'm not a professional. I don't belong on a real concert stage. Orlov's bushy eyebrows drew together in a scowl. Who decides who belongs where? Music decides. And the music has already spoken. He gestured to the audience, many of whom were still standing, watching the exchange with rapt attention. But, Elena tried again. No more buts, Orlov said firmly. Until the concert, you will practice properly. Not in stolen moments between mop buckets. We will arrange something. The coordinator, who had been scribbling notes furiously, looked up. The school has agreed to provide practice time, she said, her excitement barely contained. And Maestro Orlov has offered to personally oversee your preparation. Elena's head was spinning. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. Women in their 40s who cleaned buildings didn't suddenly get discovered and offered concerts. Yet here she was, sitting at a grand piano worth more than her car, with one of the world's greatest pianists telling her she would perform alongside him in a month. I still have to work, she said, grasping at practical concerns as her world tilted on its axis. I can't just stop showing up to my job. Details, Orlov dismissed with a wave of his hand. These are just details to be worked out. The important thing has already been decided. You must play. The rest is just... He searched for the right word. Housekeeping. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience at his unintentional pun. Even Elena smiled despite her anxiety. Now, Orlov said, his tone softening slightly, Will you play one more piece for us tonight? Something you love. No tests, no challenges, just music. The request was gentle, almost like he was trying to give her a gift after the emotional whirlwind of the past hour. Elena nodded, grateful to return to the familiar territory of the piano keys rather than continuing this overwhelming conversation. She thought for a moment, then began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Not the famous first movement that everyone knew, but the less played third movement, a burst of energy and light after the contemplative opening. Her fingers flew across the keys with newfound freedom, as if a weight she'd carried for years had suddenly lifted. As she played, Elena caught sight of Orlov watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him all evening. Not criticism or evaluation or even surprise, but simple joy. The joy of someone who had devoted his life to music, witnessing the moment when another person found their voice. In that instant, something shifted inside Elena. The fear didn't disappear, but it made room for something else, a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change its tune. The days following that night at Fairmont Concert Hall passed in a blur for Elena. She woke up the morning after, half convinced she had dreamed the whole thing. The standing ovation, Maestro Orlov's praise, the invitation to perform at Riverside Hall. But the business card from the event coordinator on her nightstand proved it had all been real. When she arrived at Pine Ridge, music school for her regular morning shift, things were different. The security guard, who usually just nodded as she signed in, greeted her with a wide smile. "There she is," he said, putting down his coffee. "Our piano star!" Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. "You heard about that?" "Heard about it?" "It's all over the school. The janitor who stunned Maestro Orlov. Principal Turner wants to see you, by the way. Said to send you straight to her office when you got in." Elena's stomach tightened. In her 15 years of working at the school, she had spoken to Principal Turner maybe 3 times, all related to cleaning schedules. What would the stern administrator think about her after-hours piano playing? Had she broken some rule she didn't know about? She made her way to the administrative wing, still wearing her practical work clothes and sensible shoes. Students were beginning to arrive for early morning practice sessions, and several did double takes as she passed. One boy actually stopped playing mid-scale and stared openly. Principal Turner's office door was open. The elegant woman behind the desk looked up as Elena knocked tentatively on the doorframe. "Elena, come in, please." Principal Turner stood and gestured to a chair. Her smile seemed genuine, if a bit bewildered. "I think we have quite a bit to discuss." Elena sat down, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Am I in trouble for using the pianos after hours?" To her surprise, Principal Turner laughed. "Trouble? No, absolutely not. Though I wish someone had told me we had such talent literally under our roof all this time." She leaned forward. "I've received 3 phone calls about you since last night. One from the Fairmont Hall director, one from Maestro Orlov's assistant, and one from the arts editor at the Tribune. They're calling you the cleaning lady virtuoso." Elena winced at the nickname. "I'm sorry about all this attention." "Don't apologize," Principal Turner said firmly. "It's wonderful for the school, and I hope for you." Her expression grew more serious. "But it does present us with an unusual situation. Maestro Orlov has requested that we make accommodations for your practice schedule. He seems quite determined to mentor you." "I still need my job," Elena said quickly. "I can't afford to stop working." Principal Turner nodded. "Of course. But perhaps we can adjust your responsibilities a bit. What would you think about splitting your time? Half your hours in maintenance, half as a practice room monitor. That role comes with access to pianos during your shifts, and it would actually help us fill a position we've been trying to staff." Elena could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You're offering me a different job?" "A modified job," Principal Turner corrected. "Same pay, more flexible hours, and legitimate access to pianos. Plus, we'd like to offer you formal student status for Orlov's upcoming master classes." She smiled. "Consider it our way of making up for not noticing what was right in front of us all these years." By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the school. Students who had never noticed Elena before suddenly wanted to talk to her. Teachers who had passed her in hallways for years without a second glance now introduced themselves. It was disorienting to suddenly be visible after so long in the shadows. During her afternoon break, Elena snuck away to her favorite practice room. the small one at the end of the east hallway, with the slightly out-of-tune upright piano and the window that caught the afternoon sun. This room had been her refuge for years. Now, sitting at the familiar piano, she tried to make sense of how completely her life had changed in less than 24 hours. She began to play softly, a simple melody she'd composed years ago. The worn keys felt like old friends under her fingers. A throat cleared in the doorway. Elena looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the light from the hall. "So this is where you've been hiding your talent," Maestro Orlov said, stepping into the room. "A closet with a piano." Elena stood up quickly, nearly knocking over the bench. "Maestro, I didn't know you were coming to the school today." "I have come to work," he said simply. "We have much to do before the concert." "I still don't think I'm ready for a real concert," Elena admitted. "Last night was different. I had nothing to lose. But people will buy tickets to hear me play at Riverside Hall. They'll expect something special." Orlov waved away her concerns. "They will hear something special. They will hear you. But I'm not trained like your other students. I don't have their technique or—" "Technique," Orlov interrupted, "can be taught in weeks. Soul cannot be taught in a lifetime." He gestured to the piano. "Play for me that piece you played last night. Your Long Walk Home." Elena sat back down, trying to calm her nerves. It was one thing to play for a hall full of strangers in a moment of unexpected courage. It was another to play for this legendary teacher in the harsh light of day, with no adrenaline to carry her through. She began to play, but her fingers felt stiff, her timing uncertain. After a few measures, Orlov raised his hand. "You are thinking too much," he said. "Last night you played from here." He tapped his chest. "Today you play from here." He tapped his forehead. "The head is a good servant but a poor master for music." Elena nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and began again. This time she focused not on the notes or even on Orlov's watchful presence, but on the feeling that had inspired the piece, the quiet determination that had carried her through difficult years, the small moments of beauty she'd found even in hardship. When she finished, Orlov nodded, satisfied. "There, that is Elena playing. Not Elena trying to impress an old Russian man." Despite her nerves, Elena laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes. I have taught hundreds of students who all want to impress the famous Orlov." He sat down on a nearby chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. "It is tiring, this need to impress. Much better to simply play the truth." Over the next hour, they worked together in that small practice room. Orlov didn't teach like any teacher Elena had observed at the school. He didn't focus on finger positioning or tempo markings. Instead, he asked questions. "What color is this passage to you? If this melody could speak, what would it say? Where in your body do you feel this chord?" His questions helped Elena articulate things she'd always sensed but never named. Music had colors, textures, temperatures to her. A minor chord wasn't sad so much as twilight-colored. A run of ascending notes felt like climbing a hillside in spring. As they worked, students and teachers passed by the open door, slowing to watch the unlikely pair, the world-famous maestro and the former janitor, deep in conversation about the emotional temperature of a B-flat minor scale. By late afternoon, Elena's head was spinning with new ideas and perspectives. Orlov finally stood up, stretching his back with a small grimace. "Enough for today," he declared. "Tomorrow we will work on your Chopin. It is good, but too polite." Chopin was not a polite composer. "Tomorrow?" Elena asked, surprised. "You want to meet again so soon?" "We have only 4 weeks," Orlov reminded her. "And much to prepare." As he gathered his coat, a thought seemed to strike him. "This practice room," he said, looking around at the scuffed walls and worn carpet. "It is not suitable." "It's always been good enough for me," Elena said, feeling strangely defensive of her secret space. "Perhaps that is why you play with such honesty," Orlov mused. "No grand surroundings to distract you from the music itself." He nodded as if confirming something to himself. "Still, for proper preparation, you need a proper piano. I will speak to Principal Turner." True to his word, by the following afternoon, Elena found herself with access to the school's best practice room, a spacious corner studio with a baby grand piano and acoustics that made even simple scales sound rich and full. The official sign-up sheet outside the door now included a daily 2-hour block reserved under her name. News of Elena's discovery spread quickly beyond the school. On her third day of lessons with Orlov, a reporter from the local paper showed up, hoping for an interview with the cleaning lady pianist. Elena declined as politely as she could, not ready to see her story in print, but she couldn't escape the attention entirely. A video someone had taken of her final performance at the master class had made its way online and was gathering views. Comments ranged from skeptical, "Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" to moved. I cried when she played her own composition. The most difficult part was explaining the situation to her fellow maintenance staff. Some were genuinely happy for her. Others seemed to think she had somehow betrayed them by having a hidden talent. Her supervisor, a kind man named Ray, who had always treated her fairly, took her aside after a week of whispering and strange looks. "It's going to be different around here," he said, not unkindly. "You're not really one of us anymore, but you're not one of them either." He nodded toward the faculty offices. "Just be careful, Elena. Don't forget who your real friends are." His warning stayed with her, a discordant note in the otherwise dizzying symphony her life had become. By the end of the second week of lessons, Orlov had completely rearranged the program for the upcoming concert. Elena would now play not just as a curiosity or special guest, but as a featured performer. The first half would be traditional repertoire, her Debussy and Chopin, along with a Bach piece Orlov insisted she learn to build your foundation. The second half would be entirely her own compositions, but I only have 3 pieces that are any good, Elena protested when he announced this plan. "Then you will compose more," Orlov said simply, as if commissioning new works were as easy as ordering dinner. Surprisingly, it was. Now that Elena had permission to play, now that she had time set aside specifically for music, the melodies that had always lived in her mind began to take more definite shape. She composed a piece about her childhood apartment, with its creaky floors and the window that looked out on a brick wall. She wrote another about her mother's hands, how they had remained gentle even when life had not been gentle to her. Each day with Orlov pushed her further, technically and emotionally. He was demanding but never cruel. When she made mistakes, he didn't berate her like he did his conservatory students. Instead, he would simply say, "Again, but remember why you play." And Elena did remember. Despite the whirlwind of attention, despite the pressure of the approaching concert, despite the strange new reality of having her name on a practice room door, the core of why she played remained unchanged. Music had always been her true voice, her way of speaking what couldn't be said in words. 3 weeks into their work together, as Elena finished playing a particularly challenging passage from her new composition, Orlov nodded with satisfaction. "Good," he said. "Very good. You are nearly ready." Elena wasn't so sure, but she had learned to trust his judgment. She gathered her sheet music, actual printed copies of her compositions professionally notated thanks to the music department's resources. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, falling into their routine. Orlov shook his head. "Tomorrow we move to Riverside Hall. You must practice on the concert piano, get comfortable with the space." He fixed her with his intense gaze. 1 week until the world hears Elena Mercer's music. "Are you prepared?" The question hung in the air between them, filled with both challenge and faith. "I think so," Elena said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. "Yes, I'm ready." The evening of the concert arrived faster than Elena could have imagined. Standing backstage at Riverside Hall, she peeked through the curtains at the filling auditorium. Unlike the masterclass where she'd first played, this venue was twice the size, with balcony seating and ornate chandeliers casting a golden glow over everything. Every seat appeared to be taken. "Full house," a stagehand commented, noticing her wide-eyed gaze. "Maestro Orlov always draws a crowd, but tonight's special. Everyone wants to hear you." Elena stepped back from the curtain, her mouth suddenly dry. Her simple black dress, purchased just 3 days ago with her first advance from the concert fees, felt too tight around her neck. She'd been so focused on preparing the music that she hadn't fully considered the reality of performing before hundreds of people who had paid to hear her. "Looking for escape routes?" Orlov's amused voice came from behind her. The maestro stood in the doorway of the green room, impeccable in his concert tales, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe," Elena admitted. "I keep thinking this is all some elaborate dream and I'll wake up with a mop in my hand." Orlov crossed the room and sat beside her on the velvet bench. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence. I was 37 when I gave my first major concert, he said finally, surprising her. Elena had assumed he'd been performing since childhood like most classical musicians. Really? But you're so... She gestured vaguely, unsure how to finish the sentence. So accomplished, Orlov suggested. So confident. I was not always this way. He straightened his already perfect bow tie. In Russia, I was a factory worker who played piano at night in workers' halls. Until one day, a visiting professor heard me and offered me a chance much as I offered you. Elena stared at him. In their weeks of working together, Orlov had never shared anything personal about his past. She had researched him online, of course, but the articles only mentioned his illustrious career, his famous recordings, his demanding teaching style. Nothing about factory work. You never told me that, she said softly. Orlov shrugged. It was not relevant to your training. But tonight perhaps it is relevant to your courage. He looked at her directly. We recognize in others what we have experienced ourselves. When I heard you play, I heard someone who, like me, came to music through an unconventional door. Before Elena could respond, the 5-minute call came. Orlov stood, once again the formidable maestro rather than the confidant who had just shared a piece of his past. Remember, he said, tonight you play not just for yourself, but for everyone who has been overlooked, underestimated. There are Elenas everywhere, with hidden gifts the world never sees. He gave a curt nod and walked toward the stage entrance. Elena took her place in the wings, watching as Orlov was introduced to enthusiastic applause. He would play first, a short program of Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff before introducing her. As his powerful playing filled the hall, Elena closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. His technique was flawless, but it was the emotion behind the notes that moved her, just as it had that first night at the master class. All too soon, it was time. Orlov finished his final piece, accepted the audience's applause, and then raised his hand for silence. Tonight, he said, his accent more pronounced under the bright lights, I have the privilege of introducing someone extraordinary. 1 month ago, she was unknown, unseen, playing brilliant music in empty rooms. Tonight you will hear what I heard, a voice that speaks directly to the heart. He gestured toward the wings. Please welcome Elena Mercer. The applause as she walked onto the stage felt different from the surprised ovation at the masterclass. This audience had come specifically to hear her, their expectations high after the media stories about the cleaning lady pianist who stunned Maestro Orlov. Elena approached the gleaming concert grand piano at center stage. This past week she had practiced on this very instrument for hours each day, familiarizing herself with its touch, its voice, its particular character. Still, sitting down before it now with hundreds of eyes on her felt like meeting a stranger. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap, and took a deep breath. Then she looked up and scanned the audience. In the third row she spotted Thomas, the man who had sat beside her that first night. He gave her an encouraging nod. Several rows behind him were Ray and a group from the maintenance staff, looking slightly uncomfortable in their good clothes but supportive nonetheless. Principal Turner sat with several faculty members from the school, and scattered throughout were faces Elena didn't recognize, people who had read about her story and come to witness it for themselves. Elena turned to the piano. The program began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, her first piece from the masterclass, now polished under Orlov's guidance but still played with the honest emotion that had captured his attention. As she began to play, the familiar melody flowing from her fingers, Elena felt something unexpected, not nervousness but a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, not hidden away in empty practice rooms, but here, sharing music with people who wanted to hear it. The first half of the program passed in what felt like moments. Elena played her Debussy, then the Bach that Orlov had insisted upon, then the Chopin Nocturne. Each piece flowed into the next, her confidence growing with every note. The audience responded with increasingly enthusiastic applause. During the intermission, Elena retreated backstage, where Orlov waited with an unusual display of emotion, an actual smile that reached his eyes. Good, he said simply. Very good. Now comes the most important part, your own music. The second half of the concert was dedicated entirely to Elena's compositions. This had been Orlov's most daring decision to present a previously unknown pianist playing her own, works to an audience accustomed to classical masterpieces. Elena returned to the stage, to find that a microphone had been set up beside the piano. Orlov had insisted that she introduce each piece herself, explaining its origin and meaning. This terrified her almost more than playing. She had never spoken publicly before. Taking her place at the microphone, she looked out at the expectant faces. "Good evening," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "The first piece I'll play is called The Long Walk Home. I wrote it during a winter when the heat in my apartment building kept failing. I would stay late at the school where I worked, playing piano in the empty practice rooms because it was warmer there than at home." A ripple of sympathetic murmurs moved through the audience. Elena continued, finding that speaking about her music came more naturally than she'd expected. "In this piece, you'll hear the cold, the worry, but also the moments of unexpected beauty I found in those difficult nights. Music has always been my companion on the long walks of life." She moved to the piano and began to play. The piece had evolved in the months since she'd first performed it at the master class. Under Orlov's guidance, she'd expanded certain sections, refined others, but always preserved the honest emotion at its core. The audience listened with rapt attention. When she finished, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Gaining confidence, Elena introduced her next piece, a composition about her mother. "She never heard me play," Elena explained. "She passed away before I found my way to music, but I like to think she would have understood why it means so much to me." This piece was gentler than the first, a conversation between memory and longing. As Elena played, she felt her mother's presence more strongly than she had in years, not as a sharp grief, but as a warm current running beneath the music. The time she reached her final composition, a new piece called Becoming Visible that she'd written, specifically for this concert, Elena felt a strange, beautiful calm. This piece traced her journey from shadow to light, from silence to voice. It began tentatively with hesitant notes that gradually found their courage, building to a powerful middle section full of newfound confidence, before settling into a peaceful resolution that was neither triumphant nor humble, but simply true. As the final notes faded into silence, Elena kept her hands on the keys, unwilling to break the spell. The audience seemed similarly entranced, the hall completely quiet for several heartbeats. Then, as if a dam had broken, applause erupted. Not polite concert applause, but the kind that comes from genuine emotion. People rose to their feet, some wiping away tears. Elena stood, somewhat dazed by the response, and bowed as Orlov had taught her. As she straightened, she saw the maestro himself step onto the stage, leading the applause with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. When he reached her side, he did something that shocked her. He took her hand and raised it high, the gesture of a boxing referee declaring a champion. "Elena Mercer," he announced proudly, "no longer the cleaning lady who plays piano, but the pianist who once cleaned." The standing ovation continued as Elena took another bow. She caught sight of Ray and her co-workers all on their feet, clapping with genuine pride. Principal Turner was beaming. Thomas was whistling loudly, ignoring the disapproving looks from more traditional audience members. After 3 curtain calls, Elena finally left the stage, her heart pounding with exhilaration and disbelief. In the green room, a small crowd had gathered, representatives from music schools offering scholarships, a record producer interested in recording her compositions, journalists hoping for interviews. Amid the well-wishers, Orlov appeared at her side. "So," he said quietly, "was I right? About you belonging on the concert stage?" Elena smiled, still overwhelmed but no longer afraid. "You were right," she admitted. "But I'm keeping my job at the school, at least part-time." Orlov raised an eyebrow. "Even now, when you could teach, record, perform?" "Especially now," Elena said firmly. "I want to start a program for the maintenance staff, the cafeteria workers, the security guards, anyone who might have hidden talents. Free lessons, access to practice rooms after hours." She looked at him directly. "There are other Elenas out there, just as you said. People with gifts the world doesn't see because of who they are or what job they do." Orlov studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I think perhaps this is why you were given this gift, not just to play, but to open doors." Later that night, after the crowds had dispersed and the concert hall grew quiet, Elena found herself alone on the stage one last time. The cleaning crew would arrive soon to prepare the space for tomorrow's performance, and she wanted a moment to herself before they came. She sat at the piano, not to play, just to remember. 1 month ago she had been invisible, her music unheard. Tonight hundreds had listened, really listened, to what she had to say through her playing. Elena ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound. She thought of all the nights she'd spent in empty practice rooms, playing for no one but herself. Those hours hadn't been wasted. They had been preparation for this moment. As she finally stood to leave, Elena noticed a young woman watching her from the back of the hall, one of the cleaning staff, mop in hand, hesitating by the entrance. "I'm sorry," the woman called. "I didn't mean to disturb you. We're supposed to start cleaning now." "You're not disturbing me at all," Elena replied, walking to the edge of the stage. "Do you play?" "The piano, I mean." The woman shook her head. "No, but I've always wanted to learn. I sometimes listen outside the practice rooms when the students are playing." Elena smiled, recognizing herself in the woman's shy admission. "Come here," she said, patting the bench beside her. "Let me show you something." As the young woman hesitantly approached the piano, Elena began the first gentle lesson of what would become her life's second calling, finding the hidden music in unexpected places.